Welcome to the Purposeful Lab podcast series produced by Franciscan University of Steubenville. I'm Dr. Dan Keebler, your host, and this is the second season that we've had on Franciscan University. And this second season, what we're looking at is the topic of transhumanism. So we're looking at what that means, what the transhumanist movement's goals are, and trying to look at it from both a philosophical, theological, and scientific perspective. And my guest today is a colleague of mine, a good friend here at Franciscan, who's in the philosophy department, Dr. Paul Symington. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, Paul, you've been here at Franciscan for...
I think 17 years.
17 years. Okay, great. So you've been here a while. And, this past year, you and I taught a science and faith class together. So it's sort of an integrated course where we looked at topics like transhumanism, and we talked about the science, and you talked about some of the philosophy and so forth. And so we were able to sort of try to integrate some of these topics, and thought you'd be a great guest to have on. So, but before we get into that, let's maybe you could just share a little bit about your background. I know your background, you're a specialist in Aquinas in particular, but what your philosophical research has been, and what got you interested in science. And
yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. I was wondering if you invited me to be on the show as a representative of a transhumanist, right? But I appreciate that that's not the case.
We'll check later on in the show for neurological enhancements that you might have.
Yeah, right. So I've been here for 17 years teaching the philosophy department. Trained in metaphysics and medieval philosophy, and that's what I publish in. I also touch into the areas of philosophy of science as well as philosophy of language. But I'm fundamentally interested in metaphysics as a kind of framework. And when I was going through my education and reading, I really was just taken by the medieval vision, right? The metaphysical vision that is provided there. Causation from God to angels, form and matter. And what I really found was that there's a place at home in the universe for human beings in this metaphysical system. And there's a deep insight and a deep kind of humanity. So much so that I thought, even the very meaning of life comes very easily from understanding this kind of hierarchical notion of reality. Namely, that what the meaning of life is, or to know a life as meaningful, is to live a life in which you understand your place in the hierarchical order, right? We're not so low, there are things below us, and there's things higher than us, and that we're ordered to this ultimate end. And then when I thought about my experience and background in learning about science, I was intrigued in how, what a miracle modern science is. But that I was troubled by the fact that it's actually foreign to some of these ideas that are connected in the medieval worldview. And so I was interested in doing what I can to join the very arduous task, very difficult task of bringing some of these ideas together.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about sort of how humans are situated in the cosmos, because that's from a medieval perspective, because I think that's when we talk about transhumanism, the transhumanist movement is largely not looking at where humans are. Right. Well, maybe it is looking at it, but it's looking to move them in their place, to move them to a different place. But I think one of the things I've asked guests to talk about to get started is to really understand the transhumanist goals. It's important to understand what it means to be human, right? And so from a philosophical perspective, from your perspective, from me, what would you say, what is it that makes us human? What does it mean to be human? Because once we have that foundation, then we can look, are the transhumanists even transmitting, even trying to do something that's real there? That we getting above and beyond our humanity?
Yeah, and so, spoiler alert on this is I think there's actually something in the spirit of transhumanism that actually resonates with the Catholic worldview, but, there's a lot of water to pass under the bridge before we get there. But so a human being really, I think the best way to think of a human being is as a composition or a unity of a concrete and a general feature, right? So in terms of the general features, right, so we are rational animals. This is something that the medievals talked about. So we are sentient beings, and there's lots of goals associated with being a sentient being, reproduction and nutrition and general health and these sorts of things. But we're also rational. in a very general sense. And this involves things like, special cognition, foresight, free will, and these things that we associate with rationality. We're supposed to act this way, not all the time we do, but there's also, of course, a very concrete component to being a human, right? And that brings us down to things like we're Homo sapiens, we're male or female. We have, even the very particular genetic expression, the backgrounds, and all these things are all bound up together in this concrete vision of the human person. So when we, I think a good way to bring the general and the specific areas together, or the concrete areas together, is this idea that we are a soul-body composite.
Yeah.
But the thing that I don't agree with is this understanding that you have a body and the soul somehow comes to be inexplicably from something that happens at the body. I think the better view, and a view that I think is gaining more traction in the academic community, is this view of a hylomorphism, in which it's actually an opposite relationship, that the body somehow receives an actuality or an act from the soul to be the kind of thing that it is. So a human being is a physical being, is a bodily being, as it is received by this act of the soul within it. And so that opens up an avenue to explore both the concrete and the universal or general features of the human person together. So in terms of transhumanism and what the Transhumanism Project would be, the first would be maybe a little less controversial, which is how to overcome some of the particular concrete limitations that are there. These might be things that you've inherited, certainly in a medical context, right? And taking some radical interventions to help with that, and that's something that we're all used to. But then there are things like, there are particular things that we inherited from our evolutionary history, a certain pathway that we took, and so the transhumanists, that's a concrete thing that is trying to be re-engineered or something, or redirected in a positive direction. It gets very extreme once you start talking about transhumanism that's not just trying to go beyond the limitations in this concrete way, but in this general way. So whether you are an animal or whether you are a rational being, and somehow bringing us towards that. And there is, in the transhumanist movement, some movements in that direction that, for example, want to minimize our animality. So, for example, let's download our consciousness onto, run it on a computer program, et cetera. And that would be this kind of radical form that goes past, the basic limitations.
Yeah. So you're talking about, in a sense, you're talking about the precursors of real transhumanism, like, hey, we're going to fix and advance our sort of physical defects, versus the radical transhumanism, which we're going to become something different. We lose our materiality or something. It's interesting that I think if you focus on the material transhumanists, the ones that think, or the technocratic ones, and that seems to be the ones that are most popular, that we can use some technology to transfer or transform humans. Right? There is in that group, there seems to be a philosophical understanding that we're nothing more than material things, right? So, that hey, if we just mess with the material enough, we can change us into something else, because that's all we are. We're just, how do you defend this hylomorphic view versus that sort of transhumanist reductionism, because it does sort of reduce humans to just a physical thing.
Right. I think a good way to motivate this idea, of whether we can change ourselves materially to produce something that's transhuman or beyond human, take us to this final destination. I think a good way to motivate this is to distinguish between the idea of a nature and an artifact. And I think precisely the problem is that the transhumanists see the body as an artifact that can be manipulated. And I think their model for the human person is that, you have this physical substructure, and the physical substructure gives rise to this epiphenomenon of consciousness, and it's kind of a magic relationship, really. You wouldn't want to say that the body causes the mind, because there is no model of causation that they can understand there. It's just kind of, there's a correlation. We know that if something changes at this level, it might change at the conscious level. And they view the human person with that consciousness. And so I think they see that, okay, you just have this material substratum, this magical relationship and consciousness. So why not just kind of mess around with the material substratum there and get what we need?
Yeah, we know if I start banging and bludgeoning your head, that's going to mess with your
gonna do
consciousness.
something.
So there's something about this body that's associated with that consciousness that you call Paul Simon.
Right, exactly. I don't know, you never know. It might make me be a little smarter. I don't know.
But
we don't want to.
But it's almost like there's this inherently dualistic nature.
Yes.
So it's materialist in a sense that because the materials, but it is at the same time dualistic because I can move my consciousness somewhere else. It's not an integrated whole there, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I think this all flows from the idea that, here is this material thing. It's an artifact, and we can kind of impose our will on it, shape it the way that we want. But that's not how the human person is. The human person is, and if you look at scriptural references back to the reference to the person, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, like the Greek word soma, body, there's an identification with the body. It's not just true to say, I have a body, but that I am a body, I'm a physical thing. Yeah. So this nature is equated with the material thing itself. So it's not an artifact, it's a nature that has its own sort of way of being intrinsically, right?
Yeah.
So if you go around and mess with the material components of the individual, you're actually damaging the fundamental, intelligible structure of the thing that's there, right? And so it's a very different way of looking at things, other than just, this is some sort of personal stuff that can be manipulated in some kind of way.
Yeah. No, it's the idea that Paul Symington is not the body, but it is this consciousness that's in there, and that consciousness could run on another substrate. So we could find another body to put it in, or we can find a computer to put it in.
Yes.
But it's not an integrated thing where your consciousness is your body, in a sense. That it is affected by your body and all these things. And if you, it's very much dualistic.
Yes.
You can pull it off. But to me, it seems like they're missing. It's dualistic in one sense, but it's fully a phenomenon of the material, right? Because
so it's both materialist and dualistic in the same way. Yes, I agree with that. Yes. So on the dualistic side, I think that there's a sense in which this consciousness that sort of arises from the physical body has this kind of groundless existence, right? It's just sort of something that can be, appear without any real intelligible explanation for it, right? We do know that, brains are the kinds of things that are conscious, but we don't know exactly why a brain would be conscious, or even begin to sort of unpack that project, right? So, but I don't think necessarily that the transhumanist task or project necessarily is committed to even the value of consciousness itself. So, I mean, you could say one way to think of transhumanism is say, well, transhumanism is all about, extending human life, making us cognitively more capable, as well as, generally more happy, right?
Yeah.
And you might think, well, let's work technologically on trying to extend those things and enhance those things.
Right.
Whether it's through psychedelic drugs, and to experience acceptance of dying and these sorts of things. But there's this disconnect from the reality, of what should be understood to be connected to the human person, which is in the body itself. I also think that, though, that transhumanism doesn't necessarily need to be committed to the value of consciousness. I mean, I think transhumanism could, in some way, say, well, look, consciousness is sort of more trouble than it's worth. That's where you get pain from, right, and suffering. And we can, create these machines that can mimic human behavior, and all the good stuff is there. So really, we can envision a future where we retain that functionality without really having conscious human beings at all. Yeah. So that would be like a true post-human type of
something else. It's not doesn't have a conscious experience. It's not going to be human at that point, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but it seems like most transhumanists, because most of them are thinking about themselves in the sense that they want to transform themselves, right? So they think, okay, I'm going to be able to download my brain onto a computer or do something so that my consciousness can live on. So it's almost like they're trying to get rid of that animal nature. Like that one part of our animality is the decay and so forth and death and, you know, the contingency of our being.
Yeah.
But I want to have this permanence, this sort of immortality. If I can get my consciousness just keep moving from one thing to the next, then I don't have to worry about death or destruction.
Yes.
But that's assuming that consciousness is the type of thing that's separable from these things. You know, you know, and so do you think? I mean, where, you know, like what's missing there? Like the consciousness doesn't seem like the type of thing that's separable, right? But at the same time, you have these like near-death experiences that people have where, you know, the brain stops functioning and then they have some awareness. You know, you hear about these things. And there's actually a journal of near-death experiences now where they sort of catalog these. Does that reveal anything about the human person, do you think, that's relevant to transhumanism?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, I think this question, you know, about near-death experiences and the phenomenon of there being consciousness that seems to be separated from the body, as well as this tethering of consciousness properly to the body so that we can identify ourselves with the body. I think that's, you know, where, you know, a hylomorphic view kind of shines, okay? Because first of all, I would say, if someone says, well, you know, here is this immaterial account of the human soul, how can that be something that works with this material substratum? Isn't there kind of a similar problem with the on a hylomorphic view? Well, I think first of all, I would say that there is this. It's not like modern views of the mind-body relationship can answer that question, right? So I don't think we have to hold the standard the same, right? So an epiphenomenal view is not one that says, well, here's how it works. The brain directly causes this thing, so that if I can identify a change in the brain, here's the conscious phenomenon that corresponds to it. Right?
That's saying something's an epiphenomenon, saying you just don't know. It's just associated with it somehow and just sort of thrown off, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, so I think that's the first place to start. But, you know, I think in terms of giving a positive account about how maybe the immaterial soul and the brain works together, I think there's a couple of analogies to use. In the scholastic tradition, you think about the relationship between form and matter, right? So a material cause or a subject in which the form exists or is being actualized. And so the soul, as the form, actualizes the brain in some way, okay? But as a material cause, it's not just only on the side of the soul. The brain also, the material component also contributes something in that phenomenon, which is consciousness, which is both contributed by the soul and the brain, okay? So there's a couple analogies that I can use for this. So you can think of, like if you're having a party, okay, so you think of the party itself as the soul, right? But the party has to happen somewhere, right? So let's say you have the party in a particular room. And in the middle of the room, there's a table, okay? And so the party is not the room. The party happens in the room, but the shape of the room and the features of the room, like the table, will shape how the party is. So you'll bring your presents in, you'll put them in the middle of the table, right? The flow of traffic, you maybe have some seats over here and people sit down. So that gets to something like the material cause here of understanding the contribution of the brain. So the soul itself acts upon the brain to make the brain conscious. So that's how we think. So where it's happening is in the brain, but it comes through these two poles of the brain as the receiving of the action, and the soul as the fundamental actor in that relationship. And I think another analogy that's helpful for this is to think about inertia, right? So you think about when something gives the inertia to something else, when one thing collides into the other. Okay, so certainly like the soul, the object with the inertia, right, is the active component, and it strikes the other object and shifts its inertia to it, right? But it's not that the thing that receives the inertia, it contributes something too. Its particular mass to give a particular, consequence to how far it'll go and what the consequences, right? So the nature of the thing hit will also contribute something to the whole dynamic of this inertial relationship. So yes, the brain is conscious, but it's not conscious itself without having received this action from the soul. And so you can have scenarios where maybe, especially with a human being that has an immaterial soul that is able to survive the death of the body, that there might be some phenomenon where you get something like a conscious type of behavior or conscious experience that's usually bundled together with perception and all that stuff.
With the body and all the
Yeah, with the
sensory
body.
apparatus. Yeah.
So it's you can think of it almost like a positive and negative magnetic pole. The consciousness is sort of the field that's produced through it. It's the combination of both of those things together.
Yeah. And we know we can, there's a lot of ways in which we can manipulate consciousness, right? And that's sort of what the transhumanists are looking at, right? So they know that we can, like with an artificial retina, right? You can hook a chip that senses light, then sends that signal back into the brain that influences, if you send it to the right areas, you can influence our perception of things, right? So there seems to be an ability to technologically alter or enhance consciousness, right? What is the difference between that and then taking your consciousness and putting it entirely on a computer chip? Because we know at least we can hook our brains up to, and people have done this, to different electrical stimuli, for deep brain stimulation for certain like seizure disorders or for like artificial retina, cochlear implants and so forth. And you have some consciousness experience alteration. I think transhumanists, consciousness is nothing more than electrical signals, and so maybe we can just move it somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'd break that down into two questions, if I may. So the first question is, these idea of an enhancement, putting a chip in there, or manipulating the retina to get certain other biophysical signals, et cetera, that the brain might respond to. Should these be considered enhancements? Is one question, right? Is this something that we should say, if you can do it, we should do it? What's the problem with doing that, right? The other question is, what is there necessarily a biological basis to consciousness, right? So to answer the first question, in terms of the limitations of the the idea of an enhancement, shouldn't we be able to remove limitations? I think there's the idea, number one, of, and there's an ambiguity in transhumanism about, are we realizing potentials latent in the human person that we're just trying to unlock, versus are we trying to move humans beyond, humans, to be post-human or something like that, right? But the problem is that when you think about the human being as a whole, right? The human being as a whole is a nature, has a kind of limitation inherent in it, right? And so, as a nature, that nature will define exactly what is good for the thing with that nature.
Yeah.
So the idea of, let's just take human beings on a ride past humanity, and we'll come up with all these enhancements. Well, that in itself is a problem, because we don't know if when we get to the other end of that, whether what's waiting for us is going to be a good.
Right.
Because the goodness is defined with respect to the nature, right? So human beings being ethical, right, and being prudent and temperate and all these things are related to our human nature itself. So it actually negates the idea of achieving a good by going beyond that, right? But within that context of what about these limitations on, like maybe we want better than 20/20 vision, or maybe, we can get rid of certain, chronic or unfavorable conditions that some people might not like, right? Well, the problem with that, of course, is that limitations are limitations for a reason. And maybe the thing that it limits doesn't make us too happy, but it's there for a reason. So, like, for example, a speed limit, right? So you have, that's a limitation. It's something that is annoying, right? You want to get to the place where you want to go faster. But if you remove that limitation, then all of a sudden you have this collateral damage. You have fatal car crashes and all this sort of thing that comes, right? So I think the inherent puzzle or problem with, even when you identify things that are, would seem to be things that we want, we're not sure how it's going to relate to the whole human nature as right, as a complete integrated whole, right? And so I think this becomes a thorny issue there, right?
Yeah, and I think both, genetic enhancement and neural enhancement, it's that when you do that, you don't really know what's going to come out the other end. You don't know what, are you going to make things worse?
Yeah.
And then if you enhance it, is that actually going to be problematic for the person?
Right.
If my vision is too good, now I can't focus on something.
Right.
I'm seeing all the dirt or something.
Right. Yeah, right. No, right.
It is. So what is that going to do to the human person? And the way they interact with other people, right? Yeah. No, I think they're, you have, like Elon Musk and this Neuralink of trying to to hook the brain up to these computers and so forth. Do you think that is something that's actually going to be able to enhance a rationality? So you're talking about humans are these rational, and you could maybe increase your rational. We have different degrees of intelligence or rationality, but we all have that rational capacity. Is that something that then allows us to go beyond that, right? Or is there anything beyond that? Is it just like super rational or something?
Yeah. So, it does seem like so Elon Musk and his Neuralink, he's at this point focusing on particular medical, things, and so in that way, it does seem to be of a piece with what medical technology is doing now, right? You're introducing radiation. I mean, these are extreme technological solutions to medical problems, and we're used to that. And so what they're doing at this point is, trying to like with communication for ALS patients, and that's the goal, mobility and these types of things. But there are anticipations of just enhancements, which would be something that everyone might want. And it's interesting because they all seem to be cognitive enhancements or enhancements of one's IQ. So maybe increasing your memory, that would be helpful for me, increasing my memory, offload some of my memories into, some other memory bank to be able to access them, right? Or something like, telekinesis or telecommunication through thought to thought, or interfacing with a computer, et cetera. Quicker, I guess you would say thinking or something like clearer, right? So what's very interesting I find with that particular case is that it speaks to a medieval issue which is referred to as a pure perfection. So there's some enhancements that would be nice, but don't seem to be, there only seem to be contextual perfections, right? So for a bullfrog, they make the croaking noise with their throat, right? You wouldn't think of that as an enhancement if you did that to a human being, right? Okay, that's a neat noise that you're making, but that's good for a frog, but it's not good for a human being.
It's good for a laughs at a party. If you,
right, yeah,
I don't know.
It's very limited appeal. It'll probably get old pretty quick. But intelligence seems to be a pure perfection. That is to say, if you saw a frog and it was really smart, you'd be like, good on this frog, it's really smart. So these pure perfections, I think, make this question about enhancements particularly interesting, right? So the question then is there something that is incumbent upon us to try to get super intelligence? Because it seems to be a super perfection, right? But I think that there is obviously lots of practical problems with implanting a chip in someone's brain, and you lose autonomy if you've got some guy who can
stimulate your brain. And
when it gets hacked or something, right? So there's problems with that. But even in principle, it's quite possible that there's something there's human thinking. And human thinking might be different in a way, the quality or the goals or from purely electronic thinking or computer thinking, right? So, for example, I can imagine that, let's say someone gets a chip in their head and it makes them really smart, high IQ, et cetera, but it turns them into a consequentialist, right? So a consequentialist is an ethical theory that says, the ends justify the means. We want good outcomes. We want to maximize the good outcomes for the greatest number of people. There seems to be something rather makes us uneasy about consequentialism, because it means things like you can lie, cheat, steal, murder
As long
as you get this genuinely valued outcome, right? So let's say that chip has this cognitive impact, right? It would seem to be then you're kind of moving away from arguably a human-based thinking, right? There's lots of smart people that are consequentialists, but there seems to be something like an embodied, organic thinking that seems to be relevant in the context of thinking. So we're going to, even though in principle you're maximizing intelligence of a sort, it might be actually a curse, right? It might speak against our human nature in a way that I was talking about, like with removing some of these other limitations.
Yeah, that's the thing I think that they would argue that, hey, well, what we want is just more computational power, right? It's sort of like increasing AI up to the singularity event where it has consciousness, but they argue that. But hey, let's just add on computer chips to your brain so you can process more and more information, and then you can do with it whatever you will, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, I think you made a good point there. It's not clear that our brain is just, and the way humans think and our rational thought is not just pure computation. I think, it's years ago, this IBM Big Blue was like, and they have better machines now, the computer chess players, but the Big Blue could barely beat, the grandmasters, right? And they were pretty even, but I think it was able to beat them. I can't remember the details, but they were close. But it played chess in a totally different way. It just computated all the boards, just thousands of boards at once. And and Kasparov, at most had like 30 or 40. They're doing something different, and were able. So the human thought and rationality doesn't seem to be just pure computation, which just seems like that's putting computer chips onto your brain is a pure computation. There's something more there, and that's what as a Aquinas scholar, Aquinas looks at like that as an immaterial property, our cognition, or sort of our rational cognition. And so, is that something that is from your perspective? That's a limit that we're never going to be able to. Let me ask you this: can we, in your view, increase human intelligence just by hooking us up to more and more computer chips?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So I think the answer to that is maybe, in principle, like the ethical questions and all that, separate.
Put those
it wouldn't change it. It might change it in degree, but not in kind, right? So what reason is, in virtue of the immaterial soul, is something that is unique and of a certain kind.
Yeah.
And if something deviates from that, then it deviates from truth. And so it's just about falsity. It's not about reason and understanding, right? And to your one point before we even talk about the immateriality question, there is something about crunching. When you talked about Deep Blue, crunching all of the possible outcomes, right? It kind of presents this to itself, kind of this like the framework of the game itself. It doesn't make an integrated choice between reason and will, right? The will and the reason are both brought together. So it's not just, what should I, choose to do today? What's the correct rational answer? Well, it's what you want to do and what is the prudent way of doing it, right? So there is this that's part of the embodied component. And that practical reason, moral reasoning, are both is that kind of reasoning, right? There's no and lots of times there is this integration with preference and desire and will, as well as what is appropriate and correct, and connecting up with these absolute norms and that kind of thing, right? But in terms of the immateriality of the intellect, There just is some basic structures to thought that the immaterial soul contributes. So if you think about thought in relationship to knowledge, right? Thought is ordered to knowledge. And knowledge involves three components. So belief, truth, and justification, these three things. And Aquinas' contribution to those three components is, first of all, belief. Belief is structured in a linguistically, the best way to think about it is linguistically of a subject, a predicate, and a copula, right? So, and what we say in that circumstance, in that structure, we have a subject is what we're thinking is about. And then the predicate is some kind of universal feature that we predicate of the particular thing, right? So when I say, Socrates is a man, man is a universal thing, and I'm predicating of Socrates. So that's how belief is structured, okay? Truth is this relationship between, what I'm thinking and reality. And so what Aristotle says is, truth is when I say what is, and it is, and what is not, and it is not, right? But the way that unity of truth occurs between the world and my mind has to do with the structure of things themselves and my ability to comprehend that structure in my mind. And this is where the idea of the form that exists in the things outside of the mind that makes it to be the thing that it is able to, which is, actualizing, it's actualizing the thing to be the thing that it is. Yeah. But that same form is able to actualize, in a sense, my mind. I'm able to recognize the structure so that then I can take that and bring the two things together. So what I'm thinking and the way the thing is unified by the form, right? But then there's the justification, which is the reason why I want to make the judgment, right? So if I'm thinking about whether, Socrates is a great philosopher, right? So I think Socrates is a great philosopher. I'm like, do I want to I understand what that means. Do I want to make that judgment, right? What is my reason for thinking this, right? So the way that Aquinas, this is all what is necessary for human thinking, right? Those three conditions. And the only way that you get there is through this process of abstraction of the form, right? From the thing into the mind. And through the judgment. So Aquinas argues that that's the best argument for the immateriality of the soul, is that there has to be a repository of these forms in this kind of immaterial space in order for me to make that particular judgment. Okay, so when you think about this let's go beyond that, or that's just what it is. And so there's a kind of stable and kind of necessary and unmanipulable space, which is the immaterial space of the soul, which is required in order for that to...
So that immaterial things that we grasp, it has to be grasped in an immaterial reality of our mind, and not on a physical thing, even though that we are mind-body composite, right? That there is no, the form of circle is not a physical thing, it's a concept. Right. And for us to grasp it. So it seems like there's got to be something beyond the material to the human mind, right? And so when we look at transhumanism, is it something special about the brain, right? So as far as we know, right, other brains are conscious. I'm assuming you're conscious because you recognize the form of man, of human being with you, and they share in that. And you can even recognize, my dog seems to have consciousness, and it has a brain, right? And so there's this consciousness seems to be associated with brains, but is it? Is it conscious also associated with a computer if it was fast enough, right? And what would be your argument for that? Do you think, a lot of these transhumanists think that hey, as computer chips get faster and faster, you pass this singularity event where suddenly consciousness just emerges out of how fast the computations are. Right. And could you have consciousness on a silicon chip rather than there's nothing special, just so happens as far as evolution has worked out that consciousness is in brains, but it could also be in other things.
Right. Yeah. I think there is at best a kind of analogy of thinking that's actually going on in these, in these machines. I think that, so the idea of, well, if we make a complex enough machine, poof, it's going to be conscious, right?
Yeah.
I think is not warranted. I think it's because we're conscious, we take certain behaviors that we program to be conscious, but they're more, it's more conscious for us. So when the algorithm is, it's getting its information and it's doing, it's crunching through its neural networking and inputs, and it gives you an answer, that's only meaningful when you recognize it as an answer on the other side that's useful to you. Otherwise, you put in, you say, well, that's, thumbs down, that's a bad answer, right? And then you keep doing that. So really, it's kind of, it's a bit of a shell game, I think, in terms of whether, what it's, I keep thinking of Plato and the cave allegory, right? Where you have the genuine McCoy, and then you have images of that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think this is really a cave problem, right? Where, there's the thing itself, and then there's the representation or the image of the thing, and people are mistaking the image of the thing for the thing itself.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably going to continue to grow because I think people spend more and more time interacting with these machines. And
they're getting more human-like in terms of their responses.
The responses,
yeah, for sure.
So I think it's probably gonna continue to grow. To personalize these machines. But in terms of the fact or the evidence that we have to go on, there's something about the brain that it does have some. Similarities with a computer, but I think the jury is certainly still out of whether at bottom a brain is a computer of some sort, right? That it can be boiled down into that. If not, and there's something else going on, then it's just an image. And so the brain is seems to be the kind of thing to look at. In terms of you have the.
We don't really understand why the brain is associated with consciousness. So the neuroscience, they call that the hard problem of consciousness. Right. Why is it the brain? They seem to be related, but why and how, it's not very, very clear, which makes it more difficult to figure out what other things might, could a computer, it doesn't seem, but the idea that there's something about the soul, right? That this immaterial aspect of the human form, the human form that informs the matter, that composite is who you are, and it's not just a brain or just a neuron or just a computer chip. And it would be interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts here as we get towards the end here. You were talking about Elon Musk and Neuralink, and now you're using these things to not enhance, but to fix defects, in the brain. What is your thought? Like, would you, hey, he comes to you, Elon walks in and says, hey, Paul, look, we're going to try to hook up some computer chips to you, see if we can enhance your memory. Like, is that something you think would be ethical to do? What are the dangers of doing that? What was your thought? Because that's one step. It's not transhumanism yet, but that's the first sort of baby steps as they move that direction. What's your thought on that? Because it seems like we're going to get to that idea, whether they know what's going to happen or not. They're going to say they'll be offering this, down the road.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways to look at that. First of all, is the idea of an enhancement is not intrinsically morally problematic, right? I mean. My students are grateful for the fact that I enhance my cognitive abilities every morning by drinking some coffee before I begin, right? So the idea that any kind of intervention should only serve, to restore health or something like that, all right? I think is also, it shouldn't be just limited to that. But I think the issue is that it's easiest to justify the radical technological interventions in the case of health and medicine, because that you are with health serving the good of the whole person. That they should be here and they're here, right? So that's more of a no-brainer. The problem with enhancements, especially ones that are radical enhancements through these invasive surgeries, et cetera, is I think that you can have subtle but very real alienation of the person to their kind of human life, right?
Yeah.
And so it could short circuit in some way an opportunity for a more genuine moral growth.
in virtue.
Yeah. Now that's not to say that we should make people's life as hard as possible.
Right,
Right? That's not what we're saying. But with these severe, if the brain in cognitive function is so definitive of a human being, then we really need to be careful. Even small tweaks of that, and like I said, you wake up a consequentialist or something like that. That's a big deal, right? Because we're making choices there, where the moral life sort of begins there. So I think I would say no.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, along those lines here, just to finish up here, what is there a possibility of being a Christian transhumanist?
Yeah.
Or is there an overlap between the Christian view of the human person and this sort of transhumanist view of the human person needs technological fix? Or is that an oxymoron?
Yeah.
Christian transhumanism.
So I think transhumanism is a way of describing Christianity. I think that and this is something that I've through my reflections come to think of, that's the goal of every human being, is this transhumanist goal. We are made in the image and likeness of God, right? So we are the imago Dei. And that there is this, image of God in the created order. There's an image of God in the recreated order in grace. This is from Thomas, right? And then in glory, there is this fulfilled image of God in that we represent in a glorified state.
Yeah.
And so Aquinas is very interesting in how he posits what is the end or the ultimate goal of man. Is it natural, because we're natural things, or is it supernatural? And he's very famous for talking about grace builds but doesn't destroy nature. It perfects nature. And so in that debate between, maybe we have both a human end and a supernatural end, or maybe we just have a supernatural end, or maybe we just have a natural end. He says we have a supernatural end, and if anything, our natural end is only hypothetical. Right, but the thing is, so we are ordered to union and the beatific vision with God.
Yeah.
So what we are after is above our pay grade, as a natural being.
Yeah,
right?
and we can't do that ourselves, although the transhumanist movement is trying to do, in a sense, if we're going to technologically get us to the next level, as from a Christian perspective, it's like God transforms us in the end, right?
Yeah, and if you frame it that way, it becomes the story of Christianity and versus the story of Adam and Eve and Satan, essentially, where, Satan is after the supernatural end on his own, without God, without giving glory to God. And as, Milton says, it's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven, right? And so this kind of, we as wayfarers, so I have this sort of thought experiment, about if I could give you a drug that made you only want to fulfill your natural end, right? Which is what you are as a human.
Yeah.
It would seem that would be wrong, right? That this desire for God and union with God, which is more than what our nature provides for us, is our true end.
Yeah.
So transhumanism, it's all on how you get there.
The means.
Where you have this transhumanist idea. Yeah.
That's great. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Dr. Symington, thanks for joining us, and I really appreciate your insights on this. Thanks.